The question I'd like to ask you is to help us ground this conversation in this community. Can you speak to some of the key factors that have shaped Peterborough's built form from your experience?
I do look at things with my architecture hat on, so bear with me tonight, because after seeing that, the first question I had in my mind after watching that video was, well, what was Toronto looking like when it had 80,000 residents? So I did some research, and it was 1876 that Toronto had 79,000 was the census data in that year. And for me, it was interesting because A.J. Lennox was a young 29-year-old architect who had just gotten a very large commission, which was the new Toronto City Hall, which was eventually built about a decade later. So that put things in context for me from that standpoint. When I think about Peterborough now at 80,000-ish, and what we have, and when you think about Ian's question about what drove that, the growth in Peterborough, I think, we've had this tradition where urban centers have been developed in small parcels where a store owner would buy a property and build a store and live above the store, and that grew the main street. But the reality is, and that's what shaped downtown Toronto, it started to shape Toronto and from an architectural standpoint, but a lot of Peterborough's growth, and I'll let some of the other panelists talk about other aspects, but some of Peterborough's growth from an architectural standpoint really has, if you look at the development after industry came, has been by developers. So it hasn't been those small parcels, it's been large-scale developments where there is one owner and there is one objective. And I think that's a huge difference. It's the Don Mills, which happened concurrently, but for Peterborough, that changed the face of the city from what it was pre-Warriors.
Thank you. I guess from a historical context, I can't really add too much. I grew up in Peterborough, but I can speak to, I guess, what I see in Peterborough, and I think you can see a lot of the history in Peterborough. Especially in the downtown and the architecture in the downtown. And I think that really reflects, Peterborough 100 years ago, 150 years ago, and the philosophy at that time, which, as Bill mentioned, it was much more scaled to the needs of the community, and that community tends to be more tightly knit in terms of business and residents and so on. Major employers, obviously, with GE and Quaker Oats are huge. You're seeing the legacies of that now as we transition to new forms, new economies and things of that nature. And certainly, to echo Bill's perspective, I mean, we definitely have been doing these kind of master plan subdivisions throughout the city, both residential and both in terms of industrial development. So that obviously is something that ties in quite closely with places to grow, and I think what every city has been experiencing in terms of how they're shifting their focus from this growth outwards to aspects of intensification and learning the infrastructure impacts as we grow outwards and the costs to that. So that's something that Peterborough's got to wrestle with all of those things in terms of brownfield sites, heritage preservation, and the balance between outward growth and growing upwards and redevelopment.
So just to add to what Bill and Jeff have already said, I think in the same way they were talking about the experience of Toronto, dominant modes of transportation have also shaped the city we see today. And so, when we had the streetcar, Charlotte Street and George Street were primary corridors, and we see that those are still primary commercial corridors today, but with the expansion of the 115, we also see new car-oriented development in areas that are in proximity to highways, in a way that we didn't see early on in the century. And an example that we're experiencing today is the development of the 407 and the kinds of expansion that will enable. And so I think that for me, provides sort of a current example of, how development might have been influenced by significant motorways like the 115 or roadway developments. And so certainly I think the car has enabled the development of the city we experience today in a pretty significant way, and has shaped many of the communities that we live in. I think from a social or environmental perspective as well, our understanding of health has shifted a lot, and that has influenced where we choose to live and why. And so I think in many large cities, and certainly in Peterborough, sanitation was a much different conversation 100 years ago, and downtowns were perceived of as, and in many real ways were more polluted, and they had a negative impact on individual health. And so I think the idea that you could have more private space and that there could be, it could be green and bucolic was understood to be something that was healthy. And so I think not only was that private space sort of perceived of as desirable, but also something that would support better health among populations. And I think as our understanding of health has shifted to a more population-based perspective, we sort of now understand the really significant ways in which that kind of development is harming the environment and is negatively impacting human health. Our rates of activity are lower. And so I think that understanding has shifted, but that shift has, that's in the time scale we're talking about, that shift is relatively recent. And so I think we're sort of living in a community that reflects an understanding of health that is different than we have now.
Certainly I would agree with Brianna just in terms of the transportation. And I think it was alluded to in the film there about this notion that form really defines function. In other words, the form that you create defines the transportation networks and the modes of transportation that your city will depend on. And the notion of modal splits, in terms of automobile dependency, transit, walkability, cycling, and so on. Those are all factors that need to be considered when we plan our city and we plan our infrastructure. So, and it's not unlike, I think, any city that you'll find in Canada is wrestling with these challenges and taking the built form now and trying to find ways to look at working with that at the same time of encouraging growth in the city.
Peterborough hasn't necessarily had the immigrant growth that Toronto has had, but religion played a strong role in Peterborough as well as manufacturing, of course. But I think it's so important to understand is how placemaking happened at an early stage from religion. And if anyone's interested, in 1876, the population in Peterborough was 4,600.